You're just a blind old man, what can you do?" That's what the boy in the red hoodie shouted, loud enough for the whole park to hear. His friends laughed. The kind of laugh that isn't just cruel, it's ignorant. The kind of laugh that makes you wonder what happened to respect, to decency. But the man they were laughing at, he just stood there, still, silent, with his cane, wearing a dusty ball cap embroidered with the words, U.S. Army, retired. No reaction, not yet. He looked broken, at first glance. His milky eyes stared off into nothing. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the bench, slowly lowering himself. But there was something else. Something off. Not weak, not pathetic. Something hidden. The teenagers kept mocking him. "Lost your way, Grandpa? Need a dog or a diaper? Bet you faked it just for the pension." They didn't know. They didn't know what those eyes had seen. They didn't know how many nights he'd spent alone in the sand, listening for footsteps. That never came back. They didn't know how he lost his sight, not to age, but to war. One minute they were laughing. The next, he stood, slowly, calmly. But what happened next? No one expected. Not the kids, not the people watching, not even the local police who showed up too late to stop what was already in motion. And that's where this story begins. Not in a battlefield overseas, but in a quiet corner of an American park, where a forgotten veteran reminded the world who he truly was. Because this is not just a story about blindness, it's not even about bullying. It's about strength, the kind you can't see. It's about dignity, the kind you can't take. And it's about justice, the kind that unfolds when you least expect it. What happened in the next 10 minutes will stay with you forever. But before we get there, let's go back. Back to the moment this man lost his sight. Back to the moment he gained something even more powerful in return. Because this man's name is Calvin Briggs. And he wasn't always blind. He wasn't always broken. He was a sniper, a father, a leader, a ghost in the desert. And the road that led him to that park bench was paved in blood, betrayal, and buried secrets. Episode 1 begins now. But be warned, you'll never look at a stranger the same way again. Dust, smoke, screams. The last thing Staff Sgt. Calvin Briggs ever saw was fire erupting from a second-story window in Fallujah. He had just spotted a child, maybe 8, maybe 10, standing motionless in the middle of the road. Calvin froze. Something wasn't right. The child didn't flinch, didn't move. And that's when he saw it. The wire running from the boy's ankle into the rubble. "IED! IED!" he shouted into the comms, just as his team hit the ground. Then, boom. The explosion tore the silence in half. Calvin was thrown backward, face first into the dirt, the force crushing his visor, burning his corneas instantly. He woke up 3 days later, blind, alone, and alive. Doctors told him he was lucky. He didn't feel lucky. "I'd rather have lost my legs than my sight," he confessed to Chaplain Reeds weeks later. Because vision was everything to a sniper. And to a man like Calvin Briggs, trained to read the terrain, spot threats miles away, protect his unit. It was worse than death. Worse still, he blamed himself. The mission had been botched. 3 of his men didn't make it out. And though no one ever said it out loud, Calvin knew the truth that haunted him. He hesitated. He couldn't shoot a child, even if it meant risking everyone. When the Army retired him, they handed him a folded flag, a disability check, and a pat on the back. But no one ever looked him in the eye again. Not his neighbors. Not the cashier who gave him the wrong change and rolled her eyes when he asked for help. Not even his son, Darren, who hadn't visited in 2 years. Calvin learned to move by memory, learned to cook without burning his fingers, learned to sit silently in the park every morning, just to feel the sun on his face. Until today. Today, the mocking voices brought something back. Something deep. Something dangerous. As the teenager in the red hoodie got closer, laughing at him again, Calvin slowly reached inside his jacket. Not for a weapon, not for revenge, but for something that would silence them more than bullets ever could. To be continued in episode 2. The metal they tried to erase. The teenager snatched the object from Calvin's hand before the old man could speak. "What's this, your pension card, old man?" he sneered. But when he looked down at what he had taken, the smirk vanished. It wasn't a card. It was a Medal of Honor. Authentic. Heavy. Engraved with one name. Staff Sgt. Calvin M. Briggs. The other kids leaned in, confused. "Wait, that's real?" one asked. "No way," said another, but his voice cracked slightly. The bravado was fading, fast. Calvin, still seated, spoke with quiet authority. "Give it back." The teen hesitated, suddenly unsure. He dropped the medal onto the bench and took a step back. "You don't get to laugh," Calvin said, voice calm but cutting. "Not at me, not at anyone who served." There was silence now. Even the dog walkers nearby stopped, sensing the shift. Respect had entered the space like a storm front rolling in. "I didn't get this medal for being lucky," he continued. "I got it for dragging 3 men through enemy fire, blind, after the blast, by following the sound of their voices. Do you aim?" Hand clenched slightly. "They tried to send me home with nothing but silence, but a man named Corporal Rivas made sure my name wasn't forgotten. He lost both legs that day. He said I gave him back his life." The kid in the hoodie swallowed hard. Something changed in his posture. Less swagger. More shame. "Why didn't you tell someone?" one of them asked. "Why would you just sit here and let people think you're—" He trailed off, embarrassed by his own words. Calvin smiled, not cruelly, but with the weight of a man who's learned patience the hard way. "I'm not here to prove myself, I don't need applause, but every once in a while, it's good to remind people, you can't see courage, but you damn well better respect it." Just then, a woman nearby, who'd been watching quietly, approached and said, "Excuse me, are you the Calvin Briggs?" He nodded. "I think I served with your son." Calvin's head lifted, his lips parted slightly. "My son?" he whispered. To be continued in episode 3. Letters never sent. "My son?" Calvin asked, voice trembling. The woman nodded. "Darren Briggs. He was my commanding officer in Kandahar. Quiet guy, smart, respected." She paused. Talked about his dad all the time. Calvin's breath caught in his chest. He hadn't heard Darren's voice in years. Not since the hospital. Not since the silence that followed his return. He never answered my letters," Calvin said quietly. "Not one." The woman gave a sad smile. "That's not what he told us." She pulled out her phone and scrolled. "He used to read them out loud. Said, 'My dad's blind, but he sees clearer than most people I know.'" Calvin's hands clenched the cane in his lap. He tried to speak. Couldn't. "Why hasn't he come to see me?" he finally whispered. She looked at him with eyes full of sympathy. "He thought you were ashamed of him. Said after what happened overseas, you stopped calling." Calvin's heart sank. The pain wasn't just in his chest, it was in his soul. He thought he was protecting Darren by staying distant. He didn't want his son to see him like this, broken, haunted, hollow. But all this time, Darren thought he had been abandoned. The woman continued. He carries your medal in his locker, said you never got the honor you deserved, that you vanished when the war ended, just like the rest of the heroes they don't write about. A single tear slipped down Calvin's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. The teens were still there, watching, listening. No one mocked now. One of them, the youngest, stepped forward and handed Calvin a folded paper. I found this under the bench, he said softly. I think it's yours. Calvin unfolded it slowly. His fingers traced the edges. The handwriting was familiar. Dad, if you ever read this, I still remember you teaching me how to aim with my eyes closed. You always said, trust your instincts, son. I miss you. I hope you're okay. Darren. The paper shook in his hand. The woman looked at him. He's back stateside, only a few hours away. Calvin didn't hesitate. I need to see my boy. To be continued in episode 4, The Drive to Redemption. The next morning, Calvin stood at the curb, cane in one hand, duffel bag in the other. He hadn't traveled in years, not since the hospital, not since the nightmares took the wheel. But today, he was going. Not for therapy, not for ceremony, for Darren. The woman from the park, her name was Sergeant Mel Torres, had volunteered to drive him. You got me out of hell once, she said. Let me return the favor. As the miles passed, Calvin sat in silence, fingers tracing the edges of the metal now safely pinned inside his jacket. His mind raced. Would Darren even want to see me? What do I say to a son who thinks I walked away? Torres spoke softly, breaking the quiet. He talked about the way you trained him, said you never missed a shot, even blindfolded. Calvin chuckled lightly. I wasn't training him to be a soldier, just wanted him to believe in himself. She nodded. He does, because of you. 3 hours in, they pulled off the highway onto a quiet street lined with tired homes and aging oaks. At the end of the road stood a modest brick house with a flag out front, proudly faded, waving gently in the breeze. Calvin's breath caught. That flagpole, he'd installed it himself years ago, before the war, before everything. As they approached, the front door opened, and there he was. Darren Briggs, older, hardened, but the same sharp jaw, same stance, same steel in his eyes. He froze on the porch, didn't move. Calvin stepped out of the car slowly. No cane now, just the metal, just himself. Hey, son, he said, voice cracking. I read your letter. Silence. Then, Darren stepped forward. One step, then another. And then he hugged him, tight, fierce. Years of pain, guilt, and silence melting between them. I thought you gave up on me, Darren whispered. I never did, Calvin replied. I gave up on myself. I was wrong, father and son for a long time. They stood like that. Torres watched from the car, eyes glassy. She whispered to herself, they don't all get endings like this. But this story wasn't finished just yet, because back in the town they left behind, someone had uploaded the park footage to the internet, and it was going viral. To be continued in episode 5. The internet remembers. It started with one video. Grainy cell phone footage from a teenager's Instagram story. A blind veteran, a group of kids mocking him, and then silence when he pulled out the Medal of Honor. The caption read, "We laughed, but we were wrong." By morning, the clip had over 2 million views. By lunch, Calvin Briggs was trending. The blind sniper, respect the veterans, not all heroes Our scene news outlets picked it up next. Unidentified veteran humbles bullies with quiet strength. War hero silences hate with honor. Medal of Honor recipient resurfaces in viral clip. Messages poured in. From strangers. From old war buddies. From parents. Showing the clip to their kids with tears in their eyes. And from veterans, thousands of them, who knew exactly what Calvin had carried in silence. They flooded the comments. That man walked through hell. Respect, Sergeant Briggs. You speak for all of us. You are not forgotten. Back at Darren's house, Calvin didn't even know he was famous again. Not until Darren showed him the screen. Dad, you need to hear this. He played a voicemail. Sergeant Briggs, this is Colonel Mitchell from the... Department of Veterans Affairs. We'd like to formally invite you to Washington, D.C. for a ceremony honoring unsung heroes. America saw what you did. It's time we honor what you gave. Calvin said nothing for a long moment, then smiled softly. America finally saw me again, and I didn't even have to open my eyes. Torres called that evening. You broke the internet, Briggs. I didn't break anything, he replied. I just reminded people. Reminded them of what? That some wounds can't be seen. That silence doesn't mean weakness, and that sometimes the strongest men walk with a cane. The next morning, Calvin returned to the park. This time, he wasn't alone. Veterans were there, lined up, saluting him. Teenagers stood quietly, holding flags. Reporters tried to swarm, but Calvin waved them off. He walked slowly to the same bench, sat down, lifted his face toward the sky, and smiled. Because for the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. And just as the sun rose over the trees, the crowd began to chant, "Thank you for your service. Thank you, Sergeant Briggs." And he nodded, with pride. The ceremony in D.C. wasn't televised, it wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was real. In a quiet hall inside the Pentagon, Calvin Briggs stood, with help from his son on one side and Sergeant Torres on the other. He wore a fresh uniform, pressed, clean, his medals perfectly aligned, and over his heart, that same old one, the Medal of Honor, as the commander of the U.S. Army approached the podium. The room fell silent. Today, he began, we don't just honor a soldier, we honor a man who showed the world that bravery isn't loud, it's steady. That courage doesn't always wear a uniform, sometimes it wears scars. And that even when our nation forgets its heroes, our heroes never stop serving. Calvin's hands trembled slightly as the final commendation was read aloud. Not because he was nervous, but because this time he felt it. Recognition. Honor. Closure. Afterward, a young soldier approached him in the hallway. "Sir," the kid said, eyes shining, "my brother showed me that video. I signed up for the Army because of you." Calvin chuckled. "Son, I was just sitting on a bench." "No, sir," the soldier replied. "You stood for something when everyone else sat down." Those words stayed with Calvin, long after the cameras were gone, long after the applause faded. He didn't return to that park bench again, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to anymore. Instead, Calvin joined a local veterans group, started mentoring blind soldiers, and once a month, he and Darren volunteered together, teaching kids how to shoot safely, how to lead with their head and their heart. And in every class, Calvin reminded them, you don't need eyes to see what's right, you just need the guts to stand for it. They once laughed at a blind veteran. 10 minutes later, they couldn't look him in the eye, because what they thought was weakness. was strength forged in silence. And now, thanks to one moment caught on camera, the world saw it too. Calvin Briggs didn't ask to be remembered, but now he'll never be forgotten. If this story moved you, there are others like it that deserve to be remembered. Click the next video on our channel to meet more forgotten heroes, and don't forget to subscribe so we can bring these voices back to light. Let's never stop honoring those who were once invisible. See you in the next story.